welcome to the anniversary edition of the TLA Immigration Podcast. We launched the podcast 1 year ago during London Tech Week, and my first guest on the podcast was Russ Shaw from Tech London Advocates, and I'm delighted to have him back a year later during London Tech Week to talk all things tech, immigration, and anything else we want to talk about during
Sounds
this
great
podcast.
to me. Very happy to be back.
Let's do the boring bit and let's do some introductions. My name is Pat Saini. In my day job, I head the immigration team at law firm Pennington's Manchester Cooper. I also chair the immigration working group at Tech London Advocates, and I'm delighted to have the founder of Tech London Advocates with me today, Russ Shaw. Who I never like to introduce because I like Russ to introduce himself and tell us about Tech London Advocates and, most importantly, Tech London Advocates anniversary.
Yes, all very exciting. So, Pat, great to see you. Great to be back again on the podcast. So, my name is Russ. I'm the founder of Tech London Advocates and Global Tech Advocates. And yes, it's the 10-year anniversary of TLA. We started this beast a long time ago. You've been part of that journey right from the get-go. We now have over 15,000 Tech London advocates here in London, across the UK, and in over 70 countries around the world. Global Tech Advocates now has 30 groups as part of our global network spanning the globe across all 6 continents, and more in the pipeline, which we can talk about in a moment. And yes, it's the 10th anniversary of London Tech Week. I was there when we were a partner for the very first one, when Mayor Boris Johnson and former Mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, came to open the very first London Tech Week at a venue called Central Working in Shoreditch, which is where we actually launched TLA back in 2013. So great to be back.
Yes, it seems like yesterday, actually. It doesn't seem.
It was yesterday.
A lot's happened in the world
We're not
since
10
then.
years older.
A lot's happened in the world since then. And what are the themes of London Tech Week this time around?
Yeah, it's really broad and very much expanding. So there are actually 18 different content streams. One focuses on enterprise, one focuses on leadership, one focuses on startups, and then you've got the climate tech event, you've got the health tech summit, you've got the AI summit. Those are the big anchor events that take place during the week. And then where I tend to spend a lot of my time is on the London Tech Week Fringe. And we expect this week to have at least 80 to 100 fringe events taking place all around London. And to me, that's where some of the most interesting events take place. In fact, Pennington's last year did a fantastic event on NFTs. I last year attended over 25 events, and that was a standout event for me. So lots of different things happening, lots of international delegations coming from around the world, which is really exciting to see. But we've also got some of the boroughs doing activities and events. So we've kind of gone from very local to hyper global, and that'll be on Showcase this week.
Fantastic. And we're doing 3 events this year.
Yes, I know,
London
which is
Tech
great.
Week, so
I'm hoping to get to all of them if I can.
So we're all very excited about London Tech Week. Before we sort of get on to our favourite topic, immigration, you travel a lot, Russ. I've travelled with you. We were in India last year. What are you hearing about the UK and its tech ecosystem? Where are we in the world? Because obviously there's a lot of media, there's a lot of press attention. People still talk about Brexit, people still talk about COVID recovery, cost of living, all of those things. But what are you hearing on the ground? Yeah,
I think it's both positive and negative. I mean, the negative side of things is that Brexit hangover. There are still issues from the visa and immigration side in terms of getting skilled talent to come to the UK. We've got some good visas, but the process that people have to go through is rather daunting. I think it was interesting when we were in India. Obviously, a whole new perspective on the UK with a Prime Minister of Indian heritage, which I think has really helped us, not just in India, but in other parts of the world. And I think in terms of tech, I think there's, if you look back over the past year, there's still a lot of interest, support, and optimism about the UK tech sector. Well over 100 tech unicorns, and that number just keeps growing. It was also really interesting, I think, for people to watch what happened within the UK when Silicon Valley Bank closed its doors. The US got a lot of that attention, and I remember being in Singapore a couple of weeks afterwards and hearing Singaporean leaders talk about that. But the UK and the UK tech sector, I think, did just a remarkable job in terms of coming together, demonstrating great collaboration. We woke up on Saturday morning, the 12th of March. I won't forget it. 7:30, heard that SVB UK closed its doors. An hour later, a Save UK Tech WhatsApp site was set up. People like Bindi Korea, one of our advocates and great friends of our community, was one of the key leaders behind it. And literally within 48 hours, we went from the government saying we don't want to get involved to the government enabling the acquisition of SVB in the UK by HSBC. I was actually about to go on Bloomberg television 7:30 a.m. Monday morning to talk about what was happening, and just got this great dose of very good news. But a lot of people came together in ways I haven't really seen in many other tech hubs around the world. So a story like that, even though it was a difficult story, it had a really positive outcome, and it was indicative of how this sector works so closely together in the UK. That reverberates around the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember that weekend very well. But by business hours on Monday, we'd had that positive story.
Yes.
And that's, we need to do more of that. But actually, we need to promote that story as well.
We do.
It gets forgotten. People are worried about other banks, what's going to happen. But this is what happens. In a crisis, everything came together. And by Monday morning, business hours, a solution was on the table.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was great for me to see everybody just stepped in and did something to help. My role was very much doing the outreach to the startups and scale-ups and some investors who had accounts at SVB. And particularly on the Saturday, it was saying to them, look, here's a form that Treasury has provided us. Fill it out as quickly as you can. Send it back. We're sending messages to Treasury saying, look, in the grand scheme, the numbers may not be that big, but boy, these companies have huge impact. I talked to one IT company that works for the NHS, and they said, look, we're small. We have about 100 employees, but if we can't open our doors on Monday because we can't access our bank account, 18 million NHS patients will be impacted. Oh my gosh, let's get that off to Treasury. So we all worked from a grassroots point of view. Treasury, the Prime Minister's office, British Venture Capital Association, the Bank of England, the British Business Bank came together so quickly, and everybody just said, we can't let this happen. We've worked so hard over so many years to build up such a vibrant tech ecosystem in the UK, and it worked. And then it was get the message out there. I mean, I did so many press interviews on the Sunday and then on the Monday, as did many others, to say, this is what happened. And maybe one day somebody will write a film script about this, because it was remarkable.
Film script, that would be fantastic. Let's get you a part.
I know. I'm just
we have a media and entertainment sector.
Who can play me?
You.
No, maybe George Clooney. How's that?
Perfect. Let's get that sorted. You see, on the Silicon Valley Bank, I think for us from the immigration side, sending a lot of our startups to Silicon Valley Bank, was important, because it was one of the banks that's recognized in order to get a sponsor license, because it's a fully regulated bank.
Yes.
So we also had that panic over the weekend of, okay, well, who are we now going to be sending our clients to? Because, the traditional banks take a long time to open bank accounts. Tech sector, speed is of the essence. So again, just to get that certainty and get that over a weekend was very, very important. And it's showcasing what we can do and what we can do really well if we really put our minds together.
Absolutely. It was also interesting because we were also operating in parallel with what was going on in the US at that time. And, our tech sector here, we've always benchmarked ourselves versus the US tech sector in Silicon Valley. And, on the Sunday night, it was interesting to see how the Biden administration just basically said all SVB account holders in the US would get their full amounts guaranteed, not just the statutory $250,000, which put even more pressure on the situation here. I did BBC Radio 5 live at 5 a.m. that Monday morning, and we had somebody from Silicon Valley, and she was just thrilled that they had gotten to that point. However, it took them quite a bit longer to find somebody to find SVB. So when we announced that HSBC was acquiring the UK business, suddenly the whole tenor flipped, and it was like, oh, the UK really moved very quickly, and yet the US was still taking some time to get resolution. So the dynamics through all of this were absolutely fascinating.
Yes, no, and it was, like I said, it was a relief for everybody, and especially for our clients in the immigration space. Not just sending new clients, but existing clients, and that uncertainty. We were getting lots of questions at the weekend. You know, if are we going to lose our sponsor license? And if we lose our sponsor license, what happens to our sponsored workers?
I heard a lot of that too. Yes.
Yeah. And it was, again, there's a lot of noise. You know, trying to reassure people it would be okay. You know, but it's difficult because people have money. People know that they're responsible for their staff. Like, how are they going to navigate through this? We had a similar incident when Tech Nation made their announcement about closing its doors with the Tech Nation, the Global Talent Visa. There was a lot of panic with people rushing to get applications in, people concerned that if the application was in, would it still get decided, what was going to happen. Eventually, we've had an announcement about Founders Forum coming in. That took a while, you know, and suddenly we were left with what is a route for tech talent to come to the UK, because there was a big plug for when the Global Talent Visa was first announced during the Cameron and Osborne era, about attracting the right tech talent to the UK. Wouldn't have to come into a sponsored route. You know, how do we get the next Twitter, Facebook idea born from people that have come to the UK? And that's why the Global Talent Visa was introduced. Unfortunately, I think because of the uncertainty, the route hasn't really recovered, because people are still a little bit uncertain about what happens with Founders Forum. Are they still going to be endorsing? Well, they are. I mean, you know, the route is still open. But this is what happens when uncertainty and things aren't resolved quickly.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I hope that Founders Forum Group, during London Tech Week, during this week, will make some further statements about what is part of their role in acquiring the Tech Nation piece and what programs will they continue with. But you're absolutely right. Anytime you inject a degree of uncertainty like this, that will create a blip in terms of people thinking twice before they apply for a global talent visa or a scale-up visa. And, you know, so we need to make sure that the messaging is right. And you asked me earlier about what do I hear when I travel around the world. This is certainly one of those discussions that you have with people to say, no, this is a good place to come to apply for a global talent visa. You know, we've got leaders on the ground like yourself who are there to help and assist. So we have to keep banging that drum. And in parallel, we have to keep the pressure on the Home Office and the UK government to say, we want to make sure that these people go through a good process. Don't abandon them, don't treat them miserably, because that has such massive soft power reverberations when our Prime Minister and others are wanting the world's best talent to come here. So we have to have a greater degree of consistency from what we're offering through our visas and immigration, the messaging that we have around it, but then the actual implementation and execution. You know, sadly, there's probably not one global talent visa person that I've spoken to who said they had a brilliant, seamless process. You know, many other countries, you know, sadly put their international talent through similar hurdles. I mean, the US, I've heard, is just a nightmare. But that's where we can differentiate ourselves. And if we want to continue to become a science and technology powerhouse, some fixes to the back office, if you will, of how we handle this will go a long way to attract that talent and say, this is a good place to come. You'll be treated well. We won't put you through a nightmare process before you even arrive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially because, you know, Tech Nation, they have an alumni network, and that alumni network will still carry on. And the alumni network was set up by Tech Nation visa holders to help support people in the community. And it's a great community because
Yes.
they really, someone sends out a message, whether they're looking for funding, or open a bank account, and straight away 5 or 6 people are responding, and they're really looking to help each other. One of the reforms I think I would like to see on the Tech Nation visa is the opportunity to go in front of a panel. So I meet a lot of people, and I have a conversation with them either face to face or Zoom, and I go back to that moment because we were around the table when the category was created. What were we looking for? Who were we looking to bring to the UK? And I'll come away from a meeting and I'll think absolutely the visa was designed for you. And then I get their personal statement or their reference letters, and you have this moment of, was this the same person?
Really?
Because
Okay.
people aren't always able to articulate on paper what they can say in person. And sometimes it's the other way around. And you'll meet some people and you'll think, if the last round, or if Tech Nation were unsure about a candidate, they thought they were borderline, could there be a face-to-face or or Zoom or Teams panel discussion where a group of experts like yourself or any would be able to really ask people about their experiences, what their plans were,
Yes.
and make a final decision based on that.
I think that's a great idea and suggestion. And again, the challenge is how do we get the Home Office to adopt such measures? And again, looking at the bigger picture, these can be great differentiators for us when, everyone I speak to, whether it's here or other tech hubs around the world, the war for global talent is on. And whereas 10 years ago, I think the UK stood out as a real differentiator with its entrepreneur visa, which I know you've been a real fan of. Many other countries have now closed that gap. So what else can we do? And I think we've got some creative visas, but if the message is getting out that the process is good, that when you go through the application process, it's not just a written experience, but you have a chance to present yourself. Wow, I think those are such great suggestions, and it will enable the country to bring in the talent it so desperately wants and needs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, again, one of the things I'm hearing at the moment is when I talk to someone who's a VC, we've been told don't apply for the Tech Nation visa because they've either gone through Tech Nation have this portal that you can put your experience in, and it will tell you whether they think you should apply for the visa or not. And VCs often get I know we've got a no. And so there's a feeling that if you're a VC, don't bother applying for the Tech Nation visa because you're not going to get it.
Wow.
Now I see that as very peculiar because
That's very
I'm
odd.
like, we you tell me, we need proper VCs.
We do.
Yeah.
We desperately
Yeah.
need them. So
Yeah.
if they're being discouraged by the process, there's
Yeah.
something wrong with
But
that.
also with some of the criteria. So I think that definitely needs to a bit of a shake up and have a look at. Going back to sort of saying to the Home Office, I think the other problem is we're possibly 18 months away from a general election. The appetite for doing something different or doing something revolutionary in the time scale doesn't seem to be there, especially when we're hearing lots and lots of press stories about immigration. It's never far from media headlines. So the day we're recording this, the day before, the Home Secretary has given a speech. We already knew what that speech was going to say before she made the speech. We are being told that net migration figures is the difference between those that come into the UK versus those that emigrate. So 10 years ago, actually, I was having a look at where the figures were 10 years ago. So we were around the 200,000 mark. And David Cameron...
Per year, annually.
Yeah.
Okay.
David Cameron and Theresa May had this manifesto objective of bringing the numbers down to the tens of thousands. It never happened. And then we've had Brexit, we had COVID, there was a knock-on effect of the numbers then, but we're expecting this year's figures to be released before the end of this month. And the talk is that those figures are going to be somewhere between 700,000 to 900, possibly reaching 1 million. So that's a massive increase, in
Huge.
10 years. However, what the newspaper headlines don't talk about is what is the story behind those figures. Like, nobody wants to get into the detail. Some of those figures are, yes, work visas have gone up. In the last 3 years, they've gone up by 161%.
Wow.
So, give you an example, in 2019, we had 63,757 work visas. In 2022, we had 166,408 work visas. So yes, there's been that need to plug the skills gap, and we'll come on to that in a minute. But also in those figures that are going to be 700,000 plus is Ukrainian nationals who absolutely needed a safe route to
And some may go back.
Yeah,
at
some may
point.
go back. In fact, a lot of people that I speak to, are desperate to go back, and some have gone back.
Yes.
Yeah. Hong Kong, safe passage for nationals from Hong Kong, Afghan nationals. So within the figures is, it's not just people who come here to work, come here to set up a business, are those people that, we need to help, we need to protect. EU national numbers have been going down since Brexit, and therefore other nationalities have been getting visas, have been coming into the UK. But the problem is there is a skills gap, and there is shortages. And yes, you can pick up a paper and, someone will say unemployment is slightly going up. Someone will say, no, we've still got too many vacancies that we have to fill. But we've got 9 million people that are economically inactive. Now, that's either because they have chosen to retire early, or they're long-term sick, or for whatever reasons. We don't have enough workers to fill those gaps.
Yes.
And again, the press talk about lorry drivers and hospitality. But if we just look at tech, and let's think about technology is everywhere, So I contrast my journey into work this morning, the difference between getting stuck on the Elizabeth line platform and then having to go onto the Bakerloo line. So on the Elizabeth line platform, all the workers had handheld tablets that they were communicating and sending messages from. And on the Bakerloo line, everybody had a traditional walkie-talkie. So, technology is everywhere.
It is.
Children at school, sports, creative industries, it's absolutely everywhere. And I still feel, though I do a lot of work in education as well, that, the education sector is not producing the right graduates or the right students and individuals with the right level of operational, not just sort of academic experience, but operational experience. And therefore, my clients are looking at non-UK nationals to come in and work alongside UK nationals, sometimes fill in those roles. Still getting a lot of cybersecurity specialists in the UK. We were talking about cybersecurity specialists 10 years ago.
Yes.
Developers, we were talking about them 10 years ago. And we still haven't managed to upskill, train enough people that are here and don't require visas to fill those gaps. And if we want to be the innovators and, and be ahead of everybody in the world, those ideas need to be here, and we need to be producing the right people here.
Yes. Oh, I completely agree. I mean, if you look at the educational system, I always say, look, if you want to change the curriculum, it'll take 10 or 20 years. And we just have to think differently about that. I mean, we do now have coding as part of the curriculum, included as part of the ICT curriculum, which is great, although not every school, secondary school, does teach
because we
coding.
don't have enough teachers.
Correct. That's also part of the problem. I think what I've seen change over the past 10 years is, the consistency is that, look, there's still a skills shortage. And, now we estimate in 2023, there's at least 150,000 tech vacancies. Pre-pandemic, 2018, 2019, that number was between 40 and 50,000. So we've seen a doubling or a trebling of the tech vacancies issue, which is why people like yourself are so critical, because there's such a desperate need to bring in the skilled talent from overseas. So I think that's certainly one aspect of it. But I think one of the things that we've been doing in tech is we've been speaking not just about STEM, but STEAM, and basically saying we need young people of all types of skills, even if they're not studying science or maths or going into computer science, but if they're doing art, design, whatever, to just think about how they could then transition into a digital role. And I do think our universities are not doing enough to help people make that transition. My eldest was 4 years at Oxford studying French and French literature, but never touched digital at all. Now, he's very digitally savvy, but he picked that up on the side, as do some people. But we need to make sure that everybody's picking up those digital skills. And that our curriculum is reinforcing that, if not in the classroom, through a lot of the not-for-profits and other NGOs that are out there that do fabulous work to help young people understand what their career options are. I think the good news is there are so many organizations that are now focusing on that, and we haven't yet seen the benefit come through in terms of people moving from GCSEs to A-levels to uni. But I hope we will see that uptick, especially with young women and young girls wanting to make that change and transition. But we can't just bank on that. And therefore, our visa and immigration system needs to carry a lot of that load, especially in the near term. And the other benefit to that is the knowledge transfer that happens when you bring and invite the world's best talent to come here to intermingle with our own homegrown talent. You know, if that homegrown talent is not getting it through their curriculum or university, they might get it through work because that's who they're sitting next to. And that's part of the whole mix that needs to have happen here. And again, those countries and areas who are welcoming of those people will benefit over the longer term. You know, you and I have both been to Dubai. I mean, they just have opened their doors to overseas talent. They want to be the remote working hub of the world. You know, now that's unique to their situation. I'm not saying we should fully replicate that here, but that mindset about embracing overseas talent with local homegrown talent needs to permeate through everything that we're doing. I continue to believe that is one of the reasons why London in particular, but the UK has done well. Our, you know, Manchester, Bristol, we've got a great melting pot of talent. And coming back to your question earlier, what do I hear from other tech hubs in the world? They love places like London because if they're from Singapore, Australia, China, India, wherever, they can come here and not feel totally alienated because there are other people from their home country who've come here who are working. That's such a powerful story to tell. When I look globally, there are not many cities that do that. Maybe New York does that to a degree, but that's a really powerful element of what we've got to offer. So we've got to look at all of these components, the educational system, you know, the outside support that people can help, and keeping a mindset of digital technology training, even if you're not a hardcore engineer. And then we have to look at the 50-somethings and 60-somethings. You know, we were speaking earlier about the Chancellor's event, Treasury Connect, earlier this year, which, you know, the Chancellor was saying there's 500,000 to 600,000 55-somethings who he'd love to get back into the world of work to add economic value. And I'm thinking they would also be great, but they might need some reskilling and retraining. And where are the programs to help them to do that? Some of them are out there, but many don't necessarily know where to go. So again, any type of government, whether it's our current government or a future government, that can look at the UK workforce and say, what is our strategy behind getting to this point over the next 10 or 20 years? I think could do a lot of great good for us. We haven't seen as much as I would like from our current government. Our Labour Party is looking at this as an opportunity to say, what can we do if we get into government in 18 months' time to really equip our workforce for the future? And those nations that do that well in the coming years will have the most successful economies in the world. Yeah. I hope the UK is part of that.
No, absolutely. It does sort of require a let's stop, let's step back, and let's do something a little bit different. Because, again, going back to 10 years ago, I remember when digital tech jobs went on the shortage occupation list, for example.
Yes.
One of the things that we, TLA, were asked to present, well, what is the private sector doing to upskill? You know, Migration Advisory Committee wanted to visit places where they were seeing, you know, the sponsored worker who would come in and how there was a British national sitting next to them and they were teaching them, they were upskilling. And we demonstrated all of those things.
Yes.
You know, we introduced them to organizations, you know, we showed the plan, we showed what the private sector were doing. You know, in 2017, not being satisfied with everything that the private sector was doing, the Home Office, for example, introduced the immigration skills charge.
Yep.
And the immigration health charge had been introduced a few years before that. And and then the apprenticeship levy came about a few years later, and we were told that these extra fees were being introduced. Now, for the skills charge, it is, for a large company, it's £1,000 per year per sponsored worker. So if Penningtons were sponsoring someone, we'd be paying £5,000 additional to the other visa fees for the skills charge.
Wow.
Okay. And at the time, we were told that that money was going to go into the Department of Education to help plug the skills gap. So I was doing some research earlier on. My colleague and I are presenting something, and we were like, "Where's that money gone?" So I actually Googled whatever happened to the immigration skills charge money, and along with the apprenticeship levy money. Unfortunately, what's happened is that money has gone into funding those departments. So it's not an extra set of money. It's keeping those departments afloat. So, it hasn't gone into plugging those skills gaps.
No.
So the private sector is only going to be able to do as much as it can. We've just come out of a pandemic.
Yes.
Everybody, I need to get the job done. How quickly can I get the job done? And then you're like, oh, yes, no, I also have to think about upskilling. I also have to think about, but if there's no, if the money's just gone into funding the department, we're not seeing those returns at all. But employers still have to keep on paying that skills charge if they want to bring in a sponsored worker. And the other thing was visa fees are expensive. And I think one of the things that the government thought was, the more expensive they make it, it'll turn people off. Well, my day job, this is what we do.
Yes.
And I haven't had a client to date turn around and say, this is too expensive. I can't bring the worker in. What they're saying is, I need to bring the worker in.
Yes.
How quickly can we do this? Okay, maybe we need some employment advice, because if the employee decides to leave us within a year, can we claw back some of that money because visa costs are very expensive?
Yes.
But the conversation does not end with, this is too expensive, we're not doing it. This is expensive, but we have to do it.
Yes.
So people aren't bringing in these experts just for the sake of it. They're bringing them in because they absolutely need them. Because it's not cheap to sponsor people.
No, and there's an economic benefit for bringing these people in, and therefore the money that goes to the Home Office or whomever to fund these things, where is that being spent?
Yeah.
You and I were speaking earlier about the process that many of these applicants follow, and it's not a very pleasant process. And I think I'd mentioned to you that there's not even a portal that you can log into just to see what is the status of your application. You have to place a phone call, and sometimes your call gets answered and sometimes it doesn't get answered. So
you also have to pay money for that phone call.
Well,
as well.
exactly. So, these are things that I think the private sector needs to address with the government or the opposition party to say, look, there's an opportunity here. There's economic value that's being created. We want the UK to continue to be a science and technology powerhouse. Well, this component about international talent is a very important part of that equation. London would not be a top 5 tech hub without the international talent. And, even with Brexit and EU nationals having left, or many of them having left, we're still doing okay because there's a great influx of international talent that's bringing their skills, their ideas, their innovation, and intermingling it with what's happening here at ground level. That is what we have to keep everybody focused on. And if the funds are being paid to government, they need to step up and deliver a comparable service that ensures that it becomes more seamless, because we'll get more people to come that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In the Home Office's defence, there has been an agenda to go digital.
Great.
With a lot of these applications, since Brexit, and with EU nationals. Actually, the Home Office first trialled the app with EU nationals.
Right.
So you could, biometrics could be taken electronically. I think they only worked with the Samsung phones originally.
Okay.
That was something to do with Apple, actually. Eventually, you can use either Samsung or Apple, download the app, take your photograph, etc. It was trialled with the EU nationals. Now it's been rolled out further. Not everybody now gets a biometric residence permit. You have a digital ID.
Right.
You log into the portal. You share that code with your employer or your landlord, and they can check whether you have the right to work or right to rent. So that's being rolled out slowly. It's coming. On the sponsorship side, the Home Office will also have been for years saying that they're going to move to a digital platform. We're seeing some of those things come through now. So, for example, on a sponsor license, you have to have an authorizing officer. If the authorizing officer leaves, you have to do a submission and then send a form to the Home Office. They'll change it. Could take up to 18 weeks. Now that happens instantly. You do it on the system, and you press refresh, and the authorizing officer has changed. So some of those things, but it's taken a long time because 10 years ago, the Home Office were talking about going digital, and finally we're seeing some of those things.
Yes.
But we're far away from the global talent applicant being able to see how far their application has progressed in the system, because those decisions can take up to 8 weeks.
Yes.
And people are sort of left in the unknown. So there is that. There's been the will. I think the problem is there's a lot of changes in ministers and various things. Things then get put behind. But again, whatever happens in 18 months, whether it's the current government or if it's the opposition, we really need them to take a grip of some of these things and say, look, how do we move forward?
Yes.
Because going back to your earlier point about, why London is attractive, why the UK is attractive, I was talking to a company last week who had originally decided to set up in Europe. And they said, so this was an Indian company, and they said that they would go to meetings and no one would speak to them in English. They could speak English, but no one would speak to them in English.
Right.
And then the CEO went, she said, I've been there X amount of months now, and she said, try buying chilies to put in your food that aren't just for salad. And she's like, I can't do it. I don't know where to go.
Yes.
And so you come to London or you go to Manchester, or, it's, the food you like to eat, you can buy it, or you can buy the ingredients. You see people like you can, communicate in the language.
Important.
Those sort of things are really important.
Yes.
For collaboration and being able to come up with ideas and work together, all of those things are very, very important. The basics of going home and feeling you can cook a meal like you would have
absolutely
in your home country is really important.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's another advantage we've got here that, we need to be touting more. I mean, we do, particularly for London, but I think to your point, all over the UK, there are places where international talent can settle and feel at home. Mm-hmm. That's important, especially when you're making such a big decision to not just move yourself, but to move your family with you and kind of start a new life in a new place. That is something, again, that I think we can keep talking about and promoting, because I think we do that side of it pretty well. Yeah, no, absolutely. There's other countries in the world, for example, Singapore is a perfect example where if one person gets a work visa, their dependents, although maybe have travel with them, do not automatically get a work visa with them. That's a big problem, especially, from an inclusion point of view. If the main applicant is a male, is the wife who has had a career, then has to give that up. Yes. And the UK has not, we've always said, we are not that country. If the main applicant gets a visa, the dependent gets a visa straight away, they can work, they can set up their own business, etc. There's been a lot of talk around international students, unprecedented numbers, especially in master's students, and master's students are bringing in dependents, and I think there's probably a lot of conversations going on behind the scenes between the Home Office and Number 10, because we think one wants to curb the number of dependents coming in, and the other is saying no, we should allow dependents to come in. The problem there is, going back to our sort of education piece and upskilling, etc., is if my university's clients are saying not enough UK students are doing master's degrees, but international students want to do master's degrees, whether they use them here or they take that knowledge back home. And so if we cut off international students coming in to do their master's degrees, and if the UK students aren't doing them either, that also has a negative effect on our education sector. Exactly. Because who are they going to be offering and then is there an incentive to put on sort of, more forward-thinking, innovative courses if they can't get the numbers for the traditional courses? It's, It's a tricky problem. But again, you have to step back and look at it and say, but the value that brings, not just to our universities, who I'm sure are thrilled to have more overseas students come paying their full fees, but to the value that brings with those people here, with their dependents here, that's really important for our economy. And our economy over the past couple of years has not done so well. So, every little helps, I think, in this regard in terms of giving that extra boost. And those net migration numbers, over the longer term, I'm sure many of those folks are younger people. That helps. You look at what's happening in China at the moment. Their population is starting to decline.
Yep.
That's getting the world to rethink about China. And actually, India is still growing. The UK population is still growing. Germany is shrinking. Japan is shrinking. So the economic value that these countries are producing and how you support older populations with a growing younger generation, that also needs to be, this whole demography question needs to be into the mix as well. And I think as long as we keep our net migration numbers growing, that's a good thing for the UK, not just for the here and now, but for the longer term.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, and again, it's kind of going back to, I haven't said this on the podcast yet, but fit for purpose.
Yeah.
If people are coming in for the right reasons, they're plugging the right gaps, we still have that agenda to try and plug some of the skills gaps, and then if the routes are fit for purpose and the individuals that are coming in are adding value, and they are adding value, they're adding value to my clients, I see it all the time, they're adding value to the economy, then the figures are just figures. And, we kind of need to separate the noise from, actually what is going on the ground.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
A slightly different question.
Yes.
So this, and it's more to do with are you concerned with your tech hat on? I'm not concerned from a visa and immigration point of view because obviously my clients still need workers to come in. But Vodafone announced a 10%. Redundancy.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't. Vodafone's headquarters are not too far from where I live, and that's having a knock-on effect. The announcements locally where we are, and what's your view on what's happened there and where it's all of that's heading?
Yeah. Well, I think some of it is unique to Vodafone in terms of how they've been managed and. The previous CEO, there were a lot of concerns about the financial performance of the company. So I'm not surprised by that announcement. But I also look at it in the context of we've just seen a significant number of big tech companies make redundancies. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, they've all kind of stepped up over the past 6 to 9 months and said, we're pulling back a bit. And some of that was because I think they overhired during the pandemic. I'm also wondering, is that reverberation now going through the big telcos as well? So will we see not just the operators like Vodafone, but some of the Ericssons, the Nokias? We've seen a little bit from Apple, the Samsungs. Are they seeing some retrenchment required? Not a lot, but some on the horizon. And I think Vodafone is caught up in that and needs to address the profitability of some of their units, particularly in Europe. I mean, their German business unit, I don't believe, has been doing so well. So this is a correction for them to get them on the right track. The flip side of that for me is it reinforces that the growth and the energy is not in the big companies. It's in the startups and the scale-ups. And that is clearly a part of the economy that we champion a lot. Virtually the entire job growth in the UK, and we've been talking a lot on this podcast about all the vacancies, that's coming from scaling businesses who continue to struggle to fill the numbers that they need, which is why we're here talking about visas and immigration. So Vodafone is in that mix. I look at that and say some of it's unique to them, some of it is unique to the sector, and some of it is in relationship to the fact that I think big corporates continue to struggle. What's also disappointing for me is obviously they're a big UK company, they're a big international company, but we also, and I think UK PLC over the past 10 years has not invested enough in human capital, in leadership and training. And I think that's played out in the UK productivity numbers. And so it's a shame. I used to work for their competitor, O2 and Telefonica, and we went through growth and then we went through restructuring. So, but I think big companies like that are having a tougher time out there. And where's the growth globally? It's in India.
Yeah.
It's in China. I mean, the U.S. continues. I think it's a growth engine in the U.S. Their growth numbers are incredible. It's the Biden administration is cheering. 3.4% unemployment is unheard of. You're kind of at full employment levels. So Vodafone has to figure out what their role is going forward, and I think they have to go through some pain in the coming months to achieve that.
From the startup and scale-up side, what's happened with the larger companies, whether they've laid off workers or whether they've had hiring freezes, it's meant that scale-ups have picked up that talent.
They have.
They have benefited from that, and they've picked up the talent. We see it.
Yes.
With those companies that are hiring into applicants that are already here.
Yes.
It's like, okay, you're coming from one of those big companies. You're coming with that big company experience. You're now going to help this scale up, or this startup to scale up. So from that end, it's a positive.
It's been a boon.
Yeah.
I mean, when you've got people here in London losing their jobs at Google or Facebook and Meta, it sounds terrible to say, but I didn't worry about them because I knew that they would be, if they wanted to move to a scale up rather than a big tech company, opportunities abounded for them. They may not have been getting paid what they were getting at a Google or Facebook, but maybe some of that's made up with some equity. But I think, for many years, and you heard this, I heard this, there was a lot of frustration that the big tech companies were poaching the talent from the startups and scale-ups. And I think we've seen a bit of a reversal of that over the past 6 to 12 months. So,
and let's face it, we wanted to see that. We did want to see that.
We did. So let's hope that strengthens our ecosystem.
Yeah.
And again, that's what's going to drive the British economy. It's those scaling businesses, and now we have to help them to grow. So not only do we need the talent to come into the UK, but we have to help these businesses expand internationally.
Absolutely, yes.
It's a key part of the next wave of this, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Fintechs in particular, they are looking for that expansion of where do we start, but where do we go?
Yes.
That's very important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good. Can I make a plug for some things for London Tech Week?
I was just about to come on to that, yes.
Good. And for TLA. So London Tech Week, we're announcing during the week some new groups in GTA. Our Tech Korea Advocates Group is doing their formal launch. It's taken them a little while because they actually kick-started during the pandemic, but we're doing a virtual launch on the 13th of June, connecting London and Seoul, which is really exciting. And there's a lot going on in the Korean startup ecosystem. And when you've got big players like Samsung there, there's a lot of great talent there that we should be talking to. So I'm excited for that. We're going to announce that Tech Malaysia Advocates will be launching later this year. We've found the leaders to do that. And we'll also be announcing that Tech Hong Kong Advocates will be launching. That will sit under our Tech China Advocates group, and that will be our 5th group that forms part of Tech China Advocates. So 3 significant launches there, which I'm really, really excited for. And then in September, we're going to celebrate 10 years of TLA, and we're going to do it at CogX, which is taking place at the O2, which has some personal meaning for me because way back when, many, many, many years ago, when I was the chief marketing officer at O2, signed the deal for the O2 on Greenwich Peninsula. So nice to do a bit of a 10-year celebration of TLA at a venue that has some personal meaning for me. So just some things on the horizon that I wanted to share.
Perfect. We will all look forward to that. Finally.
Yes.
So London Tech Week 2033.
Wow. Okay.
Wow. What are you hoping to see?
Wow. I think what we've done really well over the past 10 years is clearly we've grown it. But it's not 80,000 or 100,000 or 150,000. My first reaction would be, it should be hundreds of thousands. And then I thought, no, we don't want that. Because I think part of what's been so special about London Tech Week is that you can meet lots of new people, but you won't get lost. I did go to an event in Dubai last October, and they were cheering that they had 150,000. It was the largest tech event in the world, which was great. But the big frustration that I and others had was we couldn't find anybody because it was so massive. So I think we want to continue to demonstrate in London Tech Week 2033 that UK tech is world leading, that we're connecting all parts of the UK, we're connecting all parts of London to all parts of the world. So ideally, if there's going to be a massive event or a significant event in 2033, I want to see more countries come here. It fits nicely with what we've been talking about on this podcast, but it reflects that London is the global connector to the world. And if London Tech Week 2023 does that well, fantastic, but I hope we can do an even better job of that in 2033. That is our secret sauce in addition to the great collaboration that we have. That's what I would aim for.
Perfect. I would like to see, not that we need a week to celebrate tech, because tech is just so part of everything that we do, but it's just the event that brings people together, because it's that event in the calendar that's like, oh yes, let's go to London Tech Week, because we're gonna move forward with certain ideas, etc. You know, so it just becomes part of the map as to, rather than just a week. From the immigration side, we'll hear this back in 10 years' time, and we'll be like, please, we'll have sorted the skills gap. We'll have
supported us, sorted diversity and inclusion.
We'll have, sorted diversity and inclusion. We'll have sorted the skills gap. But we still want to have a system where, you know, if the next great ideas are coming from Korea, or they're coming from Hong Kong, or they're coming from, we are facilitating those individuals to come to the UK in a seamless way, because we know they're contributing to our technology sector, to the ecosystem, etc. And everybody can track their applications. They know exactly where they are. We know where all the skills money is going to. That would be the dream for 10 years' time.
Yeah. We can do it.
We can do it.
We need to keep the pressure on. The work that you're doing, both here at Pennington's Manchester Cooper and through the TLA Immigration Group, is so important. You and I do a lot of work talking to the media, getting them up to speed on what's happening. And we just need to keep the pressure on government, new governments coming in to say, this is an opportunity. We shouldn't think of this as an expense or an added burden. This is investment in our future. And let's take the great assets that we have as a nation. And, you know, I've lived here now for over 30 years. This nation beats itself up a bit too much. We have some really, really great assets that we can convey around the world and encourage people to come here. This is a wonderful place to be. And, you know, the vibrancy of our tech ecosystem is just one example of all the great stuff that happens here. I still get a bit down about the weather every now and then, but I've learned to live with that as somebody from Phoenix, Arizona, who grew up with lots of sunshine. But, you know, hey, you know, you can always go to Spain or somewhere else if you want to get a dose of sun. But it's such a fantastic place to be, that I hope we can share that with many more people from around the world who want to come here.
Vitamin D supplements, and always carry an umbrella.
Big sun lamps, right?
Yeah, we'll be fine. Well, Russ, thank you ever so much,
Pleasure.
as always, for coming along to the anniversary podcast. We are all looking forward to London Tech Week, and here's to the next 10 years.
Yes, let's keep it going. We're not done with our journey.
No, we're not.